when we actually look at the qualities of masculinity, they are a lot of what we need in the world right now, and a lot of what men need more of. That clear focus, passion, and vision.
There's maybe a bit of a gap there in the therapeutic realm. Seeing a therapist was great. I now understand why I'm the way I am and why I do the things I do. What do I do now? Like, how do I move forward with my life?
What does that signal to all the clinicians that are being trained in this area, and the potential bias that is starting to develop here, that isn't holding that men are in the same cultural context as women and non-binary people?
The one thing I see with Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate is they tell men this is how it is. This is how the world is. These are the rules, boys and men. They just want to know how it is so they can take action and be okay. But the world is a very complex and messy place.
Because they're providing an alternative to the narrative that is all men are bad and wrong.
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. And today we have a really beautiful episode with Ailey Jolie, wonderful guest, psychotherapist, who really has a lovely way of speaking about men, relationships, dating, really singing to my, not to my tune, it's not my tune, but really singing from the same song sheet here when we're speaking. But it's like the conversation weaves through very, very many different ways. Like we talk a lot about, we start off talk about men and therapy. It's like, is therapy designed to help men? Which is a really beautiful conversation. And Ailey talks about her own kind of practice and how she works with men, saying, she works with a really lovely gender balance of men, women, and non-binary people. We talk about, kind of hypermasculinity within women and how that attracts toxic men. And again, Ailey talks about her personal experience. We talk a little bit about men and emotions and how when men bring their emotions to their relationship, how that can sometimes turn their partner off and why that is, what's going on inside of the woman's being, mind that would cause that. And the importance of actually really listening and how we can kind of retrain ourselves to see these thought patterns and so forth so we can have a different experience of dating and relationships. We talk about some of the ways in which we bring sexism into our relationship versus when we kind of have equal relationships as well. We try and keep things very equal, and how we can try and strike a balance because, ultimately each person's relationship is individual. We talk a fair bit about dating as well, slow dating, how we can kind of change our mindset to kind of start to attract people who are more compatible to us. And we finish up by talking about chemistry versus compatibility. And Ailey has a really good way of describing why we search for chemistry and why chemistry, especially a particular type of chemistry she describes, is actually really harmful to us and creates a really unnatural way that we start looking at dating and ourselves. But this is really a beautiful episode. I really love recording this. It was just it just felt very easeful all the way out. If you are a man and you listen to this and you're looking for some help in these areas of dating, relationship, intimacy, your own masculinity, then this is something that I do with my clients, helping them create a pathway forward, create great dating lives, enhance the level of their relationship, step into new levels of intimacy, but also to come to a place with their masculinity, they feel confident and they feel vibrant and they are embodying depth. So if that's something you're interested in, you can find my details in the show notes where you can get in contact with me. But without further ado, I'll let you jump into the episode. Welcome back, listeners, to another episode where we're going to dive into, I don't know what we're going to dive into, it usually just kind of flows. But I have a wonderful guest, someone I follow for a while, who's writing, I read, and on Instagram, because, that's my source of most information these days, because I don't read the news or watch the news. That I read and I feel really inspired by like the beautiful poetry of it. And I almost envious. I'm like, man, I wish I could write so eloquently and so beautifully and touch people's hearts in so many ways. She's also a psychotherapist who works with people all over the world, I learned today, which I must say must be very interesting from the different cultural elements. I have with me Ailey Jolie. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, and I'm very excited to be here and get to dive in a little bit with you.
It was funny because you popped up on my feed one day, and I was like, you popped up as following me on the feed. And then I kind of leaped into your DMs and was like, hey, I'd love to have you on the podcast. And you were like, yeah, I would love to. And then I spoke to our mutual friend, Big Ben, and he was just like, you should speak to my friend. Like, you'd have a great conversation. And I was like, okay, yeah. Just send him my way, man. That's cool. And then I think when he did say, I have, I was like, who is it? And I was like, we've already spoken, we've already organized episode. He was like,
I know, he's absolutely lovely. And been also such a delight to have in my life in London so far.
Man with a very big heart. I've had him on the podcast a couple of times. But yeah, I'd love to hear about your journey, because I think I hear that these London shores are not where you were born or not where you grew up potentially. So it'd be beautiful to hear your story that led you to the work that you do now.
Of course. So I'm originally from Canada, kind of the center and the middle of nowhere is how I best describe it today. And grew up pretty intensely in the dance industry and entertainment industry, and then modeling, and was Miss Canada, and like all of these kind of strange experiences, or I look back and find them quite strange and peculiar. But while kind of in that environment, experienced a lot of sexualized violence. And that was the thing that really led me into my personal psychotherapy, and then into the work that I do today. So moving out of the entertainment industry, and had a lot of experiences that I needed to alchemize, and had a lot of pain from things that have happened to me and my body. And, really worked in that area for quite a significant amount of time, specifically in the realm of trauma. I was like championing the cause, like went to Harvard, studied global mental health trauma recovery. And, when I was in that room, and I'm so blessed that I had that experience, and feel quite privileged that I got to be there with such deep thinkers who were so much further along in their career. But one thing that I noticed in that room, and it was like a really deep somatic body sense, I was like, there's this heaviness and this pain and this kind of sorrow here of people who are doing such a beautiful offering to the world of helping, people who've lived really horrendous trauma and a lot of gender-based violence and sexualized violence as a weapon of war. And I was sitting there and I was like, but where is the play? Where is the passion? Are we just helping people to like get to this status quo again? Like, what about the rest? And that is when I got really excited about sex therapy. I was like, I'm gonna like bridge these two worlds together. And then I spent time in sex therapy and in that realm. And I was like, you know what? Actually, there's some stuff I really love here. And there's some stuff that I don't really love. And doesn't really resonate with me. And that's when I found kind of my home in relational work. And really, kind of believing or similarly thinking the way of Esther Perel, and like the quality of relationship really resembles the quality of our life. And so that's kind of how I found myself in the relational realm, was through my own journey of relationships with others, with my body, with myself, with my sexuality. And I think that's reflected in my writing. I just literally, when I write, I'm like, oftentimes just thinking of like what I wish my younger self had heard, or what my younger self had known at different points in my own journey, or what I even wish I did or lived today, because I'm still very much a messy human amongst it all.
It's that piece, isn't it? We never kind of stop being messy humans. As much as we like gather information and knowledge and wisdom, I like to say this on a podcast to people, and that's why I always ask people about their story as well. It's like, as much as I know and as much as I can coach people and all these things, my life isn't perfect. I still like make massive mistakes in my relationship. I still upset my girlfriend unnecessarily. I still forget to like, I don't know. One of my common forgetful things is I forget to take out the bin bags when they're just by the door. I managed to like put my shoes on, open the door and leave, and they're like literally next to the door. Like, I'm not a perfect human being. We will always be messy human beings, I feel, until the day that we stop breathing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's a lot of the work that I do today with clients, a lot of one-on-one. And I feel quite blessed. I work pretty split with men, women, and a non-binary group. So I have kind of all three. And one of the things I'm most proud of in my practice is that I have the most amazing male clients. Like, it's been such a beautiful thing for me to experience as a psychotherapist, is getting to support men. And I know that's kind of the link that, through Ben, of like, in the realm of masculinity, that's kind of led me to meet you.
Yeah, because I guess it leads me to not so much a question. It's something I've seen, and I don't know how to group these people that I see that's saying there's like a group of men, and I don't want to say they're men's rights activists, but that's not completely true. Let's just say they are maybe more traditional masculinity people, right? And I've seen them talk about this idea that therapy isn't designed for men. And I've seen this said a few times over the last 6 months or so. And I've had men who I'm friends with, maybe some old friends, be like, "Oh, therapy's not for men." And I've had a therapist for the last 3 years. And it's been really a valuable service to me. And I just wondered actually what your thoughts on this were.
Yeah, I think that there are ways that fundamentally you, at least as like a femme identifying and cisgendered woman therapist, that I have to show up differently for my male clients. And there's a lot of like inner work that I've had to do with my relationship to men to be able to hold that space and to know like, okay, vulnerability for this person in the world is fundamentally different than my clients who are walking around in a femme identifying body. It's different. And so then me as a psychotherapist, I'm going to have to like create the container differently. And this is one thing that I am quite passionate about and speak about, is like, women for quite some time have had spaces to practice self-inquiry and to be held because they've been so blatantly harmed by patriarchy. Men haven't. And so when we even look at the number of like centers for men who've been sexually abused in Canada, I think there's only one. For about 3 years ago, there was 2 in all of Canada, like just centers for men. And when I think of that, I'm like, there's no space for the processing and this skill and this to happen. And if there's no space for that, there's no space for clinicians to learn how to do that also. And so I think that's a place where the critique of psychotherapy being maybe quite feminist has some validity, specifically when I look at North America. In the UK, it is a little bit different. There's traditions that are a little bit more alive that aren't as feminist and so oriented towards women, but that's something definitely that I think is a giant blind spot on the field of psychotherapy and how it's been practiced and commodified in North America. The UK, I can't comment on as much because I don't know it as well.
Yeah, interesting. And it's for me, and I have a lot of men that I coach actually. I'd say about 50% of my clients come to me either during therapy or after they've been with a therapist. Usually they see a therapist for anything from a year to 3 years, and then they kind of land at my door. And they usually land with the same comment. I'm like, you're like, they tell me, I open the conversation, they tell me about their lives, they say they've been seeing a therapist, and they're like, seeing a therapist was great. I now understand why I'm the way I am and why I do the things I do. And then they go, but like, what do I do now? Like, how do I move forward with my life into like creating a relationship, or I want to enhance my relationship, or I want to, figure out what my goals and my direction is in life? There seems to be a really common conversation I have with men. They're like, okay, great, I understand myself better now, but like, how do I kind of like put this into the world? It seems to be the common thing they speak to me about, which I find, and I guess that's also been my experience with my therapist, right? So we talk about, I use my therapist a bit like emotional dumping ground. Like every other week, we jump on, he's like, how are you? And I'm like, this has happened. I feel like this about this. And I feel like, and that goes on for about 50 minutes, which is perfect for me, right? Because as a coach, I also like absorb a lot of other people's emotions. So I need somewhere where I can like dump mine without concern. But you see, there's maybe a bit of a gap there in the therapeutic realm that lacks the ability to help men with direction, because, men are socialized into believing they must lead and they must have direction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it mirrors my professional experience and what I've heard in my personal life of men oftentimes coming usually to a female therapist at the start, and they get those skills and they learn how to emotionally process, and they make meaning, and they go through these stages, and then it's kind of like they're dropped in many ways. And it is that next step. And this is when I usually refer to like a male therapist. I'm like, hey, he's going to know like how you do this thing of leading in the world or taking space or being in your power, and not, hitting those old stories of being aggressive or being afraid of being a perpetrator, and how do you communicate with a woman in a way that's assertive, but also like he's going to know. I'm not going to know how to do that. I got some ideas, but they're just anecdotal at this point. And that's where I do think psychotherapy, there's kind of this gap, or a little bit of this hole. And even when we look at the APA, so the American Psychological Association, and kind of how they've defined masculinity lately and the crisis of masculinity, and they're, in the language they've used, they've kind of named it quite problematic. And it's like, what does that signal to all the clinicians that are being trained in this area, and the potential bias that is starting to develop here, that isn't holding that men are in the same cultural context as women and non-binary people. It's just affecting them, impacting them differently, which is why I think I'm so drawn to, men like you or men like Ben, who are kind of in that next step that the psychotherapy realm hasn't really figured out how to support men in just yet.
Yeah. It's interesting that we see masculinity, or as you say, that it was described as problematic, and it's a really interesting way. I go into schools sometimes and I do some workshops in schools with young boys and girls, but mainly boys. And I think what I see with them is like they have a lot of energy. They have a lot of energy, and they're trying to make sense of the world, but they're also trying to like create rules for themselves. And it's interesting how they get labeled as kind of troublesome. Like some of the ones that I've kind of come into contact with. And what I really noticed was like, no one really stopped to listen to them, like, and ask them questions like, hey, like, why do you think that? Can you, like, well, where does that, like, how can that hurt people and so forth? And I wonder the same thing with masculinities. We've kind of just said like, oh, this is problematic. Masculinity is bad. It hurts people, without really like asking the questions of like, wait, is there a good version of masculinity that actually is healing the world, is making the world a better place? Like, and how can we talk about that more? Because there's a lot of conversations around like the Andrew Tates of the world or the Jordan Petersons of the world, but there's actually really little airtime given to men who are showing up in a way that is super healthy, that are good role models. Like, I know the news and everything, they want people to click, and people click on negative things because we have negative bias. But there is like a whole ton of great role models, right, out there who, they're not going to rise to the levels of the Jordan Petersons and the Andrew Tates, because simply the click-through rate won't be as good. But like, is there a space therapeutically, even educationally in school, to also teach like healthy, healthy masculine values?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, or how in my mind I kind of conceptualize that, is that separation between masculinity, we want to call toxic masculinity, and then a lot of capitalisms, because a lot of the work that I do with my female clients, and I think this is an indicator of a process that I've been through. If you look at my education, you're like, this person had some type of complex around something, like no one goes out and gets that educated if they feel secure in themselves. Like there's something going on here. I hold that, I own that. I'm like, yeah, it's a thing. It's pretty obvious. I can't hide it anymore. And that was for me really like embodying a lot of these, like what I thought were masculine qualities, but they're actually just a lot of toxic masculinity, a lot of hyper performance, a lot of like capitalism, a lot of like needing more, and all of this stuff. And when I actually sat back and I looked at my dating life, and as I'm dating like a lot of like quite toxic representations of masculinity, and I have all this awareness, and then I had to like sit in it, and I was like, I'm quite toxic myself here. Like, I'm participating in this giant capitalist system. And I think it's really important to start pulling those things apart, how the media and clickbait has presented a lot of, I struggle to say toxic masculine, because I really want to start pulling those things apart, just a lot of toxic cultural components and masculinity. And that those are actually very separate things. And when we actually look at the qualities of masculinity, they are a lot of what we need in the world right now, and a lot of what men need more of. That sense of assuredness, that sense of connection, that sense of leadership, that sense of looking around and like, what's the best for the community? How can I protect? How can I be of service? Like that clear, focused passion and vision. It's no wonder that people like Jordan Peterson or Andrew Tate have like really monopolized on younger men, because they're providing an alternative to the narrative that is all men are bad and wrong. And to be a man is bad and wrong. And not only are they providing an alternative to that, they're providing something that will take the proverbial hit and clump myself into third wave feminism here. We haven't provided emotional spaces for men. And so if we're not doing that, they're going to pop up. And when they pop up, they're probably going to be not as clear and compassionate and conscious as if we took the time to create them. So it's like, I see it kind of as that double fold, if that kind of answered your question in some ways.
Yeah. And I've...
You'd like to use more questions?
No, it's like, what was really interesting you said there was like how when you kind of looked at yourself and you could see there was like this hyper masculinity, hyper capitalism that you were embodying, that the sort of men that you were attracting were kind of, so we say toxic, unhealthy. That's the word I like. Unhealthy men, right? Because this is my partner is also a coach, and she works with kind of high performing women, because that was her background, and that's exactly the story she tells me. When she was all about performance, all about making more money, being very ruthless, the sort of men that she thought she should be spending time with and falling for were actually really, they didn't have any sort of respect towards her. They didn't have much respect for themselves. They were all, deep into the capitalist mindset of more money, winning at any costs. And it's interesting that, from what I'm hearing from you is when you started to do some work around that started to fall away. And the second piece there is that, the one thing I see with Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate is they tell men, this is how it is. This is how the world is. These are the rules. It's like they're not even like a box. It's like an assortment of boxes. And they say they put everything in, they just tell you where everything goes. Because I guess, I know from talking to kind of adolescent boys and men, they just want to know how it is so they can take action and be okay. But the world is a very complex and messy place. And, you know, these rules don't always hold up. But as you said, like the qualities of like focus, of protection, providing, being of service, depth, sensitivity, and so forth for men is like, if we have more of that energy in the world as a whole will be a much, much better place. And I see it with individual men that I work with. But we also have this component of men who are incredibly lonely as well. Like loneliness, I can't remember the numbers of the study, you might probably remember the better than me, but there's like in London, like the number, I think it's like a third of men feel they have no best friend and they don't have anyone they can turn to talk about, which is incredibly sad. And I see this because I'm involved with some companies that run men's groups, and I see the same thing, is that men show up and they're like, oh, you know, they're scared, they're afraid to be there to start with. And then when they do share, they're like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing. But I've actually had it said to me before, this was a couple of years ago, by a woman, and she basically said to me, women feel scared when men go into all male spaces and they're talking about anything to do with like dating, relationship and intimacy, which is basically the topics I often talk about. And I wonder if how that affects men, that they see these male spaces that could be super helpful for them, but they're also a bit afraid about entering it because they're afraid of what the people in their life will think about them. Maybe the women will think that they're into some strange cult, or they're entering into the manosphere or something like that.
Yeah. As a woman, that has also been a huge piece of my work as well. And actually these two things link to kind of the first comment about kind of sharing your partner's experience. For me, the tipping point when I like really got focused on masculinity and really had like I was at my somatic experiencing training in Ottawa, and I had a beautiful colleague of mine, and we were out for lunch, and I was like sharing my story. I was just out of a relationship with a quite well-known actor, and he had been quite toxic, and I was like, blah, 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 like he hurt me, like blah, 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 and she just cut me off so succinctly. She's like, you know why this has happened to you? And I was like, like, no, like, you just ruined my story. Like, what are you doing? And just so matter of fact was like, because you have a lot of internalized misogyny. And then she changed the conversation. And I had to sit there and be like, okay, I don't even know what that means. And two, I better go find out what that means. And I don't know if it's every woman's truth, but it was my truth. That I had really internalized that I didn't believe women had worth. I didn't believe that they had the same level of respect. I did believe that my body was my currency. I did believe that my level of education would secure this thing in the world. And that was the only thing I was going to get that in the world or such forth. And kind of starting to do that inner work is what led me there. And then it's been a continuous process. I even think of a dating dynamic that I was in, a while ago, and he had a moment of deep vulnerability. And, in the world, he's a person that you would just assume, there's no space for emotion in his life. Specifically as a Black man, it was like, I have to be controlled and da-da-da-da. And I had an experience where he came over and he just cried. And I was like, whoa, all of my thoughts of like judgment and shutting down. And I was like, I'm not attracted to it anymore. I've been super attracted to him forever. And like in this moment, I'm not. And I had to like watch it all. And I was like, okay, this is my work. I want this in my relationship. I have to figure out what's going on inside me. This is like another layer. And it is that process because it is real. I do have those male clients and male friends who do go into those communities and they want that work, and then they come out and they're judged or they are, devalued in an attraction wise. And that is where it does become, participatory system where all genders and all identities have to start to shift and move out of this like toxic container that's been created around all of us. And so I definitely don't hold it just as like men's work. I'm like, no, this is kind of like human work. We're all in this soup together.
I love your honesty there, because this is something that when you talk about the man we're with and him crying and observing the thoughts, the thought patterns that arose, because I work for a lot of men, and a lot of what I help them with is being more emotionally open and available and sensitive. And some of the men that come to me, actually, they are very, very sensitive, and I have to help them be a bit more resilient. And it's interesting, a few of them have come and said, they're dating, and the women they're meeting, when they're being kind of expressive and open emotionally, they see a consistent thing there's only a few of them, where the women are like, they kind of in a very nice way say, you seem a bit feminine, so I'm not really attracted to you because you kind of like, very gentle, very sensitive and all these things. And they feel this frustration because they're trying to like move into the next stage of being a man, which is, open, expressive and so forth. But then they're coming up and against women who are who want them to almost be kind of cold and stoic in this very modern way that we call stoic. And they left with this kind of like, don't know if you're having a word for it. It's like just this kind of frustration at like trying to be better, but then being met with something that tells them, no, you need to take some steps back and you need to be more cold and less emotionally available and stuff like that. And I wonder if that's something that you see in your practice with men.
Yeah, definitely in my practice, in my couples work too. Like, okay, he's having emotion. Are you okay with the emotion? First thing first. Okay, you're fine. What's happening inside you right now as you see him having emotion? And me being quite edgy as a psychotherapist and being like, are you having any of these thoughts? Are you desexualizing him right now? Like, you're like really like going in there because I know it's in there, because it'd be really hard for it to not be based on every way that male bodies are sexualized and objectified and commodified. They're done in such a way where it's just strength and kind of ego that's presented as sexual and attractive. All the other stuff, no, it's not. So really kind of getting in there and asking those questions. And that is, that portion where male client like really gets in touch with their emotions and their sensitivity, and they have that heart opening expansion, and they actually get to explore other sides of themselves, is work as a psychotherapist that I absolutely love doing. And it is such a beautiful thing to witness. And I really hold that is really hard in partnership if they are with female partners, because there's no language around what's happening. And so it is so quick to be like, oh, it must just be, I'm not attracted to them, there's something wrong with them, instead of going, actually, maybe I've never seen a man cry before. Maybe I've never had sex with someone I've witnessed cry. Those were some like really like moments for me. I was like, oh God, what have I been doing? Interesting.
And it's I do some coaching with couples with my partner, and we've seen a similar dynamic where, man is expected to hold his woman's storm of feelings, emotion, and be there with it. And when we switch it round, the number of times when a man's really sharing like how he's feeling, what he's worried about, maybe he has some concerns about the relationship, and this is not all women, but this is what I've observed a number of times, the women can't sit and listen. They can't really like be, how do we put it? Listen to him instead of the story of what she's translating into what he's saying. I've seen it a lot of times, and it becomes like almost a capacity practice. It's like training a woman in relationship to be with her partner and like what he's feeling about himself or the relationship or his capacity, whatever, without slipping into the story of your own inadequacy or fears about the relationship. And it's interesting, like I see it quite regularly, where it's like, as I always say this to men, is like you need to learn to be able to hold your partner's feelings and emotions while listening completely to her and allowing your story to just take a back seat so you can be completely with her. But I see very often that that women that I've worked with in terms of couples where they can't really hear their partner's vulnerability. They can't really hear the emotion. And again, I say this is not all women, but I see it quite regularly because it's real training to do, to be like, okay, this man is struggling with erectile dysfunction and I'm going to listen to this. Or he is unhappy with a certain aspect of a relationship, or he has fears about the relationship. What I've regularly seen is like a kind of just soon as he starts to express, they start to hear, they drop into the story and they collapse in some way, whether that's they need to leave, whether they get angry because they're running the story. And I wonder, what's your kind of advice for women that find themselves in this situation?
My experience has been professionally and personally. They don't even know if women notice that they're doing it. So it's like at first, like, and then also like really taking into that place of like, okay, you know that like fixing narrative that we've like stamped on every man out there that they don't know how to listen and they just know how to fix. Hey, that's you too. That's you too. That's that same kind of, I don't know if hyper masculine is the right word, but hyper productive part. And so when he goes into a maybe more softer, vulnerable place, emotion-wise, do you have to then hold the thing? Or can you actually meet him in that? Can you actually meet him in the being? And you don't have to hold the doing. And this is like a skill to be learned. And oftentimes, men have kind of heard this their whole lives, specifically from, more female intimate partners. Like, hey, I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to listen. It goes both ways. And like, I also don't need you to fix this right now. I just need you to listen. And I don't need, and how the femme psyche tries to fix it is usually like creating stories and connecting dots and doing this whole thing. It's not like providing a solution. It's like, I've written you a book of all of the reasons why this can be. What volume would you like today? Like, this is our version of like fixing the problem is to do a more elaborate thing, but it's the same thing. It's still not being with. It's like, I'm doing this thing. I'm doing like mental gymnastics up here to analyze your psyche and figure out why you feel the way you feel based off of the one date I've had with you kind of thing. Like, I'm just like, whoa, I need to do that.
Yeah. It's I can just like, I'm seeing it in my kind of mind's eye. It's like the woman's listening, but she's also psychoanalyzing him. She's getting ready to coach him because she's and it's what's funny is that I very regularly get DMs from women who are super well-meaning and they're like, my boyfriend, like he needs to do the work. Like I try and send you his content and he's not doing it. Like, what do I do? And they even tell me about some of the discussions they have, and they go along the lines of what you're saying here. They hear him talking about his problems regularly or not talking about them. They take the little snippets like, oh, his mother was like this and his father was absent and he reacts in this way. And so when he does share, exactly as you said there, they bring the book, the storybook of his life, picking out certain volumes, put them together and present a psychoanalysis to him of like, oh, you're avoidant, you see. So when these things happen, this thing happens, da, 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 da. And actually like you said, what he really wanted was just someone to like ask him some questions and listen and be like, how are you feeling? Like, how does it make you feel? Instead of fixing the problem in that very feminine way of giving a full psychoanalyst download that actually still presented in a way to fix him, to give him the solution to his dilemma, but it just comes in a slightly different way to how a man would present it. Would be like, why don't you stop talking to that person? That will solve the problem. I'm off to play football.
And when anyone finds themselves in a fixing dynamic, it's not because of the other person. It's because of our inability to hold uncertainty or to hold pain or to hold confusion or to hold discomfort. We only fix other people because we can't sit with their whatever over there. That has to do with us. It's actually quite a selfish behavior. Like, I can't hold what it's like to be in this unknowingness with my male partner who I always have been told needs to be driven and focused and clear, because I can't unhold that. Now I've become an Instagram psychologist and I've mapped his whole childhood and I understand why this is happening. Like, No, that's because you can't sit with a man in his feelings, and that's totally fine. There's absolutely no judgment around that. But the only way that's can change in the dynamic for both of you is if you start to look at that stuff and start to get comfortable actually in it. Because your comfort in it might be like, hey, like the stuff he's bringing and how he's feeling like doesn't serve me, and I don't want to be in this relationship. But you won't ever get that information until you're actually in it and you stop like trying to fix or coach, which goes against a lot of conditioning as well that women have received of like they have to be the emotional supporter, the emotional coach, like the guider in those ways. And it's like, actually, we all have that capacity if we're given the opportunity. And men haven't been given the opportunity, but you as a partner, you can give him the opportunity.
So I have another program coming up in September, 12-week program this time, because I see a lot of men desiring to show up in their lives with more leadership, more expression, more connection, more depth, more openness. So I have my program, Being an Authentic Masculine Man. And in this program, really, I help men cultivate the depth they want, the deep presence and self-awareness that they haven't been able to find on their own, to really express themselves more openly and more honestly. Through the program, men have really shed a lot of shame, been able to show up powerfully in their relationships, been able to express themselves and feel confident in their dating lives, and really let go of a lot of sexual shame as well. And this is just the content, right? Like I said, the men that have been on the program in the past, you know, they've come back and said it's completely changed their lives. It's helped them build new relationships and friendships with depth and with honesty, of openness that they never thought was possible. So if you're interested in this program, which is going to be starting in September for 12 weeks, go into the show notes and you can find all the details to sign up, and we'll have a conversation about how you can jump on. A question's popped into my head, and I kind of half said it just now, and I wondered, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this. And I'm sure you also get this question. You work with couples, so you definitely get this one of like, so I'm doing the work and my partner's not doing the work. What do I do? How do I get him or her? You know, usually when it comes to me, it's women asking me how to get the men. But I've had plenty of clients who are in partnership. They're working with me and they're like, okay, my woman, she's not doing the work. How do I get her to do this? So, and it goes both ways. What's your thoughts on how we can, the question, when the question's asked to me, I'm always like, oh, so you're asking me, how can I manipulate my partner into doing the self-development work that I want him to do? So that's kind of the question.
I've never been that partner. Ever. Only a few times. When I have that, or when I receive that, maybe it's in a couple dynamic of like, okay, you know, maybe they both already committed to the container. I'll use that example. And then there's pieces around sexuality and they're like, you know, they're not showing up to doing this, da 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 da. From the stance I always take is one of just kind of pulling them back into their autonomy and agency of like, okay, they're not doing it. What does that mean for you? They're going to do whatever they're going to do over here. And I always go back to this quote of like, the foundation of trust in adult relationships is not I trust you with whatever you do. It's that I trust myself with whatever you do. So I trust that if you're not going to do this stuff, that I'm going to take action that makes sense for me. Or I'm going to be like, okay, you're not going to do it. I'm going to learn how to accept that. I'm going to learn how to get those needs met somewhere else. Maybe I'm going to have some tough conversations with you about this. But it is really dropping into like finding the edges of the me and the we. And this is something I spend like a lot of time talking about, especially after COVID. But even before that, the lack of community, the lack of connection, the social isolation, like the couple has like this really deep meaning in people's lives, which is beautiful. And also, it's not everything. Your partner is not everything. And so, you know, especially when we have that mindset, there can be that added energy to get them to change or to want them to change. And it can be really hard to pull back into that place of autonomy and agency and being like, okay, like they're not doing that thing. Like, why am I asking for something from someone who I know isn't isn't going to in this present moment, or they're not in this present moment. And what does that mean about me? Where am I also maybe not showing up for myself? And what mirroring is happening in this dynamic? Because, we do blend with the people that we're with, and, we do fall into that beautiful couple bubble. And then when there is tension, there is always needs to be these questions of like, where are the edges of you and me and what we've created? And really honoring we can't change anyone. I find myself saying that so many times over and over again, like almost like a broken record, like you can't change them. Like the most you can do is change yourself. And I will always personally disclose, like, me changing myself has been a very hard process. Like, it's hard to like legitimately change and become someone that you intentionally choose. If you have lived experience of trying to do that with yourself, it's never going to happen with someone else. You just can't do it.
I guess the intention behind it people always have is like, if they were to start to change and do this work, our relationship would be better. But actually, I think there's another layer. It's like my life would be better as well if they were to go and do the work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then it's that place of like, there's lots of ways your life could become better. Like endless options. Why have you chosen this one that you actually don't have any agency to really control or change? Lots of ways. Let's brainstorm some other ways, because we don't have that capacity over there to change them. In my practice, I get mostly a lot of male clients who are struggling with their relationship. And that is the narrative of them wanting their partner to change, or wanting their partner to show up, and wanting them to do that. And I find it oftentimes harder for my male clients to accept that they actually can't control that. And they even as much as they ask for it, it isn't going to happen, which I found really interesting. My female clients will latch onto it a little bit easier. My male clients, I'm really like working that, like, you can't change her place. Like it's been, I wouldn't have expected that going into this field or working with men.
You'd imagine that women are a bit more determined to change their men, but actually your experience is that the men are like really determined. Like, I guess it's this almost a conditioning, isn't it? Like as a man, especially if you're kind of very determined in your life and your work, you're a high performance type man, you're like, I can do anything. I can make anything happen with my will. With my iron will, I can make anything happen. And it must almost feel like to them when they realize they can't, maybe you know this better than me, does it occur to them to a degree, maybe initially, as like failure?
Especially with the narrative culture that men are avoidant, or they're not present, or they don't commit. I find that a lot of my male clients that are quite conscious and quite intentional and emotionally aware, they're like, no, I'm going to be the opposite. Like, I've committed, I'm fully in, I'm emotionally open, I'm doing all the things. And I'm like, yeah, but you've chosen someone who doesn't want to do those things with you. Like, like, how can I whisper this or like hold a sign in the back of my Zoom screen? Like, that's great, you're doing it, but like, you might need to choose again. Obviously, I can never say that, because I can't offer that type of advice or wisdom. And that's my giant bias. I'm only hearing half of a story, of course, which is always, flawed. But it is something that I do notice in my male clients, is them really wanting to counter this narrative of how men show up in relationship. And then it ends up kind of becoming quite tumultuous for them, because it's not authentic. And they've then fallen into another narrative of wanting to be counter the narrative to toxic masculinity. And that's still not authentic masculinity. That's still not being authentic to self.
And that's really interesting, because someone tagged me this morning in a story, and I read the post and haven't commented on the post yet, because I was doing my morning practice. I didn't really have time. And it talks about how masculinity influences how our relationships are. And there's some men who are like kind of traditionalists, some who are like about equality, and there was a third, which I can't remember. And I had to stop and think to myself, I was like, oh, okay, like, how do I do my relationship? Like, me and my partner, we talk a lot. You know, I guess neither of us would really class ourselves as like feminists anyway. But I guess we look at it as like, we play to our strengths. Like, what are we strong at? And let me play in that area. So as you were saying that, I was thinking to myself like, oh, am I deliberately going against the kind of traditional narrative of like man in relationship, woman in relationship? And as you said, like doing that is inauthentic because we're on the same time, we're on the same line as the traditional. We're just going, I'm rejecting that. I'm rejecting the traditional and do the opposite. But again, it's not finding our own authentic way of being. And it's a bigger question. It'd probably take me a long time to think about it. But I think we find ourselves like playing to our strengths. But then there's definitely times where we just fall into certain things. Like, she probably cleans more than I do. I cook less than she does. I kind of manage a lot of the like bill paying and finances. And like, if there's technology that needs fixing, then I will fix it. Like, I worked in tech for 16 years, so I also have an advantage there. But like, there are elements, like I provide a lot of emotional support to her in the ways that are important that she needs. But I think it's really important actually that we don't just reject some of these traditional values and ideas just because they're traditional. We assume they're bad because they're traditional. But actually our relationship, like, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Like, our relationship is kind of separate from the societal man-woman narrative. And I feel that when we bring that man-woman societal narrative into our relationship, it can actually do us a lot of harm because we can end up in this kind of like battle. Like, it becomes kind of weaponized. Like, I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah. As you were speaking, the concept of benevolent sexism just kind of was like in my head, and which is something I spend a lot of time speaking to my female clients about, some of my male clients about that double standard that's there. Like, I don't want him to assume that I have to take on the housework or the childcare and the da-da-da, but I want him to financially provide for me. And I'm like, okay, no. Let's just all pause here for a moment and just explore what configuration you are hoping for. Because if those are your traditional values, that's beautiful. Like, I love that for you. You can go find a partner who has those traditional values, but then you're going to be in the traditional box. Because that's what you want, and that's okay. But if you don't want to be in that traditional box and you want to be liberated and messy and have all these other things, your partner is probably going to want the same around his identity and his expression. And then you're going to have to like kind of speaking to my female clients, you're going to have to do some work around, you know, what you're attracted to, or what type of treatment actually serves you, and reconcile. And I spent a lot of time with my female clients on this. I had a wave at one point in my life where this is like all I was working with. And it was these very successful, very liberated, very talented, well-educated women who were really struggling with the fact that they wanted to be taken care of. They're like, I don't want my career. I want to like partner up and be a stay-at-home mom. And they're like, that's what I want. And I'm 36, I'm 38, I'm 41. And I was doing something that wasn't actually my authenticity. I've always wanted to be a mother. I've always wanted to have this experience. I've never, I didn't have a relationship with my father. I had a great relationship with my father, and I've wanted more. I've wanted that. But because of these narratives, I kind of went this other way. And then reconciling, like, okay, what does that mean? How do you want that to play out? And on the opposite end, working with male clients, oftentimes they're quite confused. They're like, I don't know what to do. Do I open the door? Do I not open the door? Oh my God, I paid for the meal. And now she's like texting me, telling me that I was like inconsiderate, and I asked to split it. And now she won't go on a second date with me. And I'm like, seriously, dude, I also don't know. I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm working with women and I'm equally confused. I think we're all quite confused around what the roles are and what roles that work for us are. And I know in my personal life, that's been a deep, my own reconciliation of like, actually, I'm comfortable being, I don't want to say shadow, but like, I don't have that need to be seen. That's not in me. And when I look at my whole history, that's why I kind of describe the entertainment industry as a strange and peculiar experience. I don't need to be spotlighted. I actually know when I'm like seeking the spotlight that I've got some like weird ego stuff that's going on, and it's like all a little dark and strange. And I'm actually really comfortable with my partner having that light on them. I actually feel like there's a lot of deep power in being able to hold that and like wanting to support them in that way, and supporting them not being my full focus, because I'm quite entrepreneurial and expressive, but I actually like that power dynamic. And when I go to some of my more feminist friends and I say that, they're like, "What do you mean?" And they get into it. But that's actually, maybe a more traditional mindset that I've had to go, that actually works for my constitution as a person, as a human. This is what I like. And that's okay. And I think I'm hoping that that starts to get more into the conversation around like relationships and what roles do you want. The dice or have been shuffled, the cards have been shuffled. We're all quite confused. And so because we are all quite confused, maybe it's time that we all start asking ourselves questions around how we want to be treated in relationship, and what traditions work for us, and where do we not want them.
Yeah, powerful. Because like as men, we often are told we have to provide, and that leads to, and then providing, and I'll be very exact here, that the way we've interpreted providing is financial providing. We've forgotten about all the other levels of provision that we can do in terms of emotional support. Support in general is a way to provide for someone, service, and all these sorts of things. But it's led a lot of men to be like, well, I have to earn more than my partner. Like I have to. And I see this at a conversation with one of my friends not too long ago. And I was telling him, and I was like, oh yeah, my partner, she earns more money than me. And he was like, oh, like, how do you feel about that? And I'm like, that's great, man. And he's like, what? Like, doesn't that bother you? I'm like, no, it really doesn't bother me. Like, it's just money. Like, maybe next year I earn more than she does. I don't know. Who knows, right? But there's a lot of internalized stuff that we have as men, as like, I have to be able to do this. And if I can't do that stuff, I have no value. I have no worth. And in this world that we're shifting into where, I don't know about the statistics. I did a interview for an article not too long ago, and she was telling me that the gender pay gap for women in the UK, especially women under 30, it's only about like 1.2% or something like that. It's quite small. It becomes much bigger when we get into the 50s and 60s. And it's like, well, there's going to be a lot of couples, men, that find themselves in a relationship with a woman who earns considerably more than them or a little bit more than them. And this is going to be some work for men, because and also women as well, right? So it goes both ways. To be like, well, actually my only value isn't the money that I can provide. I can provide all sorts of other wonderful ways of supporting and provision and so forth. Because we're so in some of these traditional ways of thinking that come through culture and so forth. And they actually block our ability to maybe date the sort of people that would actually match us well, or being in a happy relationship with people that could actually give us what we really need, not just the needs that we think we should have because our parents told us or society told us.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I was just thinking of my dating history, and a common theme is I've been the higher financially earning individual for various reasons. And I then kind of started dating outside of what I thought would work with me, because I was like, oh, this is weird. And then having to come back and be like, actually, this doesn't matter to me at all what the financial thing is, but knowing that it's been a really interesting spot for my male partners. Up them being like, well, what can I offer then? Or, how do I show up in relation to, or the disempowerment I've noticed in them, and it is something that I also work with my female clients around of like, if this wasn't there and you fully believed that you could take care of yourself and you owned that you are taking care of yourself fully right now, and you're not choosing a man because you need one, but because you want partnership, who would you choose? And the same, you know, for my male clients, like the same thing, like, okay, you're fully taking care of yourself. You own it. You're doing the thing. And who do you want to be with? If you're also not doing that, because I know my male clients oftentimes do that hierarchy more unconsciously of choosing, I'm going to choose a partner that I know I can take care of. And if I can't do that financially, then I'm going to choose someone that I can emotionally take care of. And I've seen all the red flags that this person maybe isn't in that place. But I'm strong and I can provide, and I will be their soundboard as they are a chaos monster in my life. I'm like, okay, interesting. And getting really comfortable in owning your sovereignty in many ways is how I've kind of worked with people in a psychotherapeutic setting to start to kind of like pull this stuff apart, and also in my personal life too. And that's something I'm still working on, to be honest, of just being like, oh no, like I've got me. I have generations of women who didn't have that, but I do. And what does that mean around the choices I'm going to make around who I do and do not date?
That's a big mental shift that we can take, you know, to like remember that if we, you know, we've got ourselves, we can look after ourselves, and that we maybe some of this thinking we have, these assumptions, these beliefs we have are based on that we can't look after ourselves, and we're making choices from a space that we don't really actually exist in.
Yeah. Which is, as we started, I mentioned my rampage around slow dating, which is an oxymoron. But that place of like slow, it being like first a process with yourself of like, do I know how to date myself? Do I believe I'm worthy of taking care of myself in this way? Do I like own that like I can afford to buy myself a smoothie when I go on a walk? Or I can afford the time to take time out of my life and take care of myself, and starting to build that level of awareness, of consciousness before getting into a relationship, which is why I call it slow dating, because it's real slow. It's like not a nap in any way, but it is that process of like owning autonomy and agency and sovereignty, and then exploring partnership from that place. I'm choosing you because I want to, not because I need to, not because I'm in a spiral, not because this is a reactive response, which is oftentimes what I see in a lot of my clients, is that the relationship has been chosen from a reactive place, heartbreak or pain or needing to cope with something, and there's this person there for them.
So I'm hearing there's like the slow dating is learning to give yourself the things that you need and want, and actually, no, before you even give them to, figuring out what the things that you want and need, then start to slowly implement those and give them to yourself, so you know they are what you need and what you want and what you enjoy, and then move into a space of being relational with other people.
Yeah, it's real slow. It's definitely not a swiping situation.
Because there's a lot of dating that's done out of fear, worry, anxiety. Like, if I don't, you know, if this isn't my person, then who am I going to meet anybody ever again? There's a lot of that standpoint, and it's not always conscious, right? It's not always conscious, the choice. It's coming from, you know, depending on age and gender and so forth. But I see this quite a lot, like showing up to dates. You know, it's one of the, I'd say it's one of the specialties I work with men who are like showing up to dates and they're either fearful and unaware, or they're anxious and they're really aware of anxiety, and helping them come into a place of calm and date. Because when you date from those places, the choices and reactions you make are horrendous most of the time.
I'm like being hit by my own past right now. I'm like, oh God. Yes, absolutely. And just also reflecting on a lot of female clients I've had who are quite like anxious and like, I need to find the person right now, and the da 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 da. And I think we've all felt that at different times. I know for myself, what was the like giant catalyst was actually just like sitting in the heartbreak and being like, maybe I'm actually never gonna find someone who loves me like that person loved me. I'm not. And that is really, really painful. And I'm still here and I still have myself. And I can look at the ways that they loved me that felt so good and try and put that in my life. And view the love as more of a teacher and a lesson than something I've lost.
Yeah.
But that's really hard to do. I really get that.
I was just like feeling that. And then my mind was like, you know, it's almost like I'm trying to comfort you. I could feel my urge to comfort. But I'm gonna pull the edge back, but also still say the thing I was thinking. It's like we might never meet anyone who will love us like that. But we could meet someone who will love us in a different way that
absolutely
could still be perfectly beautiful and wonderful.
Yes. And I think, at least what I notice in my practices, people get a little bit caught and they're like, yeah, I'll never have someone who loves me like that, but I can have someone who loves me like this, or like, oh my God, this is better and that is better. And oh my goodness. And then they're like in this reactive kind of compensation place instead of just holding the like, yeah, that love is never going to come in that form again. And that's okay. And it is what it is. And there'll be more, but can I honor this? And I think that ties into our culture's like inability to grieve or hold loss, and to be aware of the impermanence of us all and our lives, and that, yeah, things do genuinely end. And our comfort and ability and capacity to honor an ending is something I spend a lot of time with my clients. It's grief work in many ways. Love and grief are very close friends.
And it's a kind of back to something you said earlier, is like we struggle to sit with the uncomfortable, like to be with the uncomfortable feelings, the uncomfortable situation. We just want to move on quickly and push down and move on. And there's a kind of what I'm hearing from you is that there's incredible level of benefit and skill that can be gained from staying with the discomfort of a situation or an emotion that we're feeling without distracting ourselves, without trying to find something to be joyful about, but actually just staying with it and just allowing ourselves to kind of feel all of what it feels like to have that discomfort inside us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do genuinely believe like the more we grow our capacity to hold heartbreak or loss, the more we grow our capacity to live a heart-centered and heart-filled life. So the more we can kind of go into that depth, the more we can have over here, because we're no longer afraid of this stuff over here. We're like have some awareness of it or some type of relationship to it. And so then the next time we feel that feeling with someone, we're more open to stepping into it because we actually felt this fully and we know that we've moved through it. We know that we can. And therefore that kind of mindset really breaks down the hardened heart or the avoidance or the lack of commitment and all of these things. I kind of view those as a consequence of not really sitting in heartbreak and not really honoring an ending. Because if we do and we let ourselves be there, we're less likely to build protective strategies and defensive mechanisms the next time we go out and date.
Yeah. I had a very personal experience of that a number of years ago, where I fell in love with somebody. I often tell this story actually, but I fell in love with somebody and they were like, I don't want a relationship. And it was probably the thing I was really afraid of, you know, as a kind of avoidant man, a kind of pretty avoidant man. The thing I didn't want was to be madly in love with someone who didn't love me back. And to go through that over those months was quite a profound experience because I had to feel it. I had to be there with it. I didn't really distract myself too much. And on the other side, what I found was I was a lot less afraid of loving. I was a lot less afraid of relationships and the idea of relationships, because I kind of had a self-trust of like, well, if it doesn't go well, I'm going to be all right. Like if I can get through that, then, I'm pretty sure I can get through whatever, love can throw at me. But like, I remember there was a day where a friend of mine just said to me, he was like, how are you doing with that situation? And I was like, I'm doing all right. And he's like, I feel like you've been doing pretty well. Like you haven't been like, running around and sleeping with loads of women and avoiding it, but like you've spoken about it, how you feel. I was like, yeah. I feel pretty good about it, but I also feel pretty sad about it at the same time. And I feel quite comfortable with the fact that it's going to happen again and it's going to be okay. That if someone breaks my heart, I can survive it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That mindset of like, my heart is going to be broken again and I can survive it is something I really try and instill, not like, and in a very obvious way to my clients, but it's like really a motivation because all of us are going to experience loss and heartbreak that's bigger or maybe just as big as someone not loving us back or ending a relationship. People in our life, we're going to lose things. Things are going to happen that we could never imagine. And what is our capacity to hold that and to be with that and continue to live our lives in an authentic, intentional, heart-centered and heart-open way after they happen? And dating, and this is kind of like how I found myself in this realm in a kind of like sneaky way that I don't often talk about, is dating is one way to do that type of really, as a psychotherapist, really deep kind of existential work around loss and grief in a way where people are willing to have a conversation. There's some like cultural awareness right now that relationships are important. They are important. And the really good practice for the relationship you have with yourself and the relationship you have with whatever your belief system around what the heck is going on this globe right now. And the fact that there's like, I don't know, like, I know, and I mean more of an existential sense of like, we're all just like kind of like little ants looking at a cookbook, trying to make a 6-course meal. Like, that's kind of how I, hold like, I don't know, like there's a cosmos and planets and all these things. And like, that's kind of how I view dating, as like this entry point into, building that capacity for intentionality and to hold grief and to know that you're going to be okay when life doesn't work out and things do end. And it is hard and painful. It's kind of my sneaky why I'm in the writing about dating and relationships.
But I really... I say this to my clients. I was like, there's two statements. It's like dating is a place where we can do some of the deepest personal work, right? Because we are in relation, right? And relation is where we are most wounded in relation to people. And like you said, we have to show up as ourselves. But in real time, we are doing the work. It's like someone rejects you. Like, what do you tell yourself about yourself? What beliefs do you fall into? What do you make it mean about yourself? Like, this is where we can really like look at how our kind of default settings are in our programming. And we can start to, oh man, I'm getting into tech talk, but how we can start to patch them, like fix some of those bugs, like in the dating world, because we're always dealing with like, excitement, loss, hope, demise, unpredictable behavior from other people. Like we're having to like, it's a bit like, I don't know, man, it's like being on a ship at sea, you don't really know what's coming next and you don't really have control over it, but you can learn to more and more find inner peace in yourself, and that will start to shift how you feel about the waters. And then I also say that being in relationship is one of the best vehicles for healing that we can enter into, because again, most of our wounding is relational, like that we have. It can be the greatest vehicle for healing, and it can be one of the most terrible vehicles for wounding and traumatization as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. I love your metaphor there of being on the boat. yeah, it's one of the most, I mean, everything is a form of relationship to yourself, to other, to the world. Um, and taking that mindset with dating can be so empowering of like, okay, even though that didn't work out, or I'm doing all these things, or I'm on the app, this is an opportunity for me to get to know me and my reactions and how I'm going to show up, and what beautiful practice with this person who's going to be in my life for I don't know how much amount of time. Because if long-term relationship is what I want and I'm committed to having, whatever version that is, all of these experiences can be vehicles for my healing, for my self-growth, for my self-understanding, for my self-knowing. I love that mindset. That's one I definitely apply in my own dating life of like, what can I learn about this person, but myself and the world?
It's a beautiful curiosity.
Mm-hmm. I'm very curious.
And I'm going to change maybe direction a little bit, but I really wanted to get this piece in about, I know you talk a lot about chemistry and compatibility. You know, we mentioned, so we talked about this before we jumped on. And, you know, in the world of dating, there's a lot of focus on chemistry. There's a lot of focus on chemistry, you know, like I think one of the most common text messages I imagine in after a first, second or third date must be, hey, look, you're really nice, but I just didn't feel any chemistry. Like, you know, that's a very common message to, I've definitely sent that, hands up. And I've definitely received that before as well. Like, what's your take on kind of chemistry and compatibility?
Yeah, I love this topic because it's one of my like deeper wounds that I always have to keep an eye on when I'm in connection or romantic relationship. My history of sexualized violence really coupled adrenaline and arousal. Those things kind of pretty locked in, pretty solid. And so for myself, when I would sit in the presence of someone who made me feel unsafe or uncomfortable, or I was uncertain, or they weren't providing clarity, or like, I don't know, arousal. Like, woof, I'm like, yay, like jackpot, you know, like, woof, let's get out there. And I had to really start to slow that down and be like, actually, that's a really different feeling than genuine chemistry. And chemistry is that feeling of like, I desire more connection with you. I want to know more. I want to spend more time. And that, very sadly, is not as intense or as arousing as adrenaline and arousal coupled together. And so chemistry, you know, it is that synergy. It is that curiosity, is that little like a spark or spice that's there, but it's not the same thing as like, oh my God, I found the love of my life and I'm going to cancel all the things. Or like, the sex is so great but then we never talk again, but the sex is so great. And like, that is something else. That is this whole other experience over there. And then you have compatibility, which is even like maybe further down on the central nervous system regulator here. And that is like, we have the same values. We like to do the same things. We use the same type of language. Our work-life balance is structured similarly. Like, we have the same vision for the future. That is actually going to put you in a parasympathetic nervous system response, which is more of that down-regulating, that sense of calm. Chemistry is going to put you into a sympathetic response, so like a little bit of that spice, a little curiosity, a little interest. But when adrenaline or arousal and anxiety and all that stuff is coupled, like that's you being outside of your window of tolerance. If we use like trauma language, our central nervous system is, we're constantly going up and down, sympathetic, parasympathetic. But adrenaline, arousal, anxiety is outside the window. You've gone too high in your sympathetic nervous system and you're dysregulated. And that is something I spend a lot of time educating my clients on, because it's something that I, have to work really hard on in my personal life, because it's just how my nervous system has been wired due to my experiences of sexualized violence. And when, the statistic right now is like 1 in 3 women have experienced a form of sexualized violence, That's going to be a lot of people who are confused around what chemistry and adrenaline or anxiety. But then you also like look in our dating culture right now, and people are quite closed off, or quite maybe inconsistent or unsure, or they don't know what they're doing, like what they want, because they have like this traditional identity roles. What is my role post Me Too? Like all these things. That's going to create some anxiety. And if you've ever spent time around an anxious person, and you have any type of coupling of like adrenaline or arousal, their anxiety is going to spark yours. And oh my God, now you just have like sparks flying, dysregulated epic sex.
this regulated epic sex. That's a t-shirt right there, isn't it? But a lot of people associate that dysregulation with like butterflies. That's the one. Oh, I really got butterflies. But actually, and I also tell my clients about this, and I try and school them in like this whole idea. It's like that excitement is short-lived. You know, there's a short shelf life of that level of excitement. And that's not even reality. It's just like you're locked into like anxiety. You're like, oh my God, will they want to see me again? Oh my God, they're so attractive. Normally I don't get people this attractive. Like I need to act now. I need to take this now. You know, I need to do this thing now. And they want to kind of meet the dysregulation and take it up a few notches because they associate it with like excitement and something being meaningful even. Like it's meaningful, it's special. But as you said, it's like we're like, my hands are up in the air for people who can't see me. It's like we're like super dysregulated, outside our window of tolerance. Our heart's beating irregularly, we feel like our, blood pressure's going. And then when you go on another date the next week with another human being, and that person matches your values, they have a similar life vision for you, they're super regulated as a person, like their nervous system super regulated, and you have really lovely conversation, and there's some laughter and joking and stuff like that. We go into comparison and we'll be like, oh, well, that person, like, it just felt a bit boring. I didn't really feel anything in there. And I find it really interesting because we do this comparison. It's like, well, actually that second person, would actually be really good for you in the long term when it comes to what we want. But we've spent so much of our dating lives connecting dysregulation to compatibility. We almost like say, oh, if I feel this high adrenaline dysregulation, then that means that this person, I'm attracted to this person.
Mm-hmm. And I would like that decoupling of like adrenaline, arousal, anxiety is not attraction. They don't feel the same. And of course, this one over here is going to feel so good, meaning the adrenaline, arousal, anxiety, because you're getting a really beautiful cocktail of neurochemicals in your brain and your body, and there's a lot going on. And that's totally fine if that's what you want. You want to have that experience. You want to have amazing, hot, epic sex. And like, that's the thing that you're looking for right now in your life. All the power to you. But that is a conscious choice to hold. That's not attraction. That's a really high tense peak experience. And I can't live in a high tense peak experience. I can't live there. It's not possible. But that might be what I want right now. And I have to hold that. It's just not possible for any of us to live in that type of intensity, adrenaline, arousal, all of the things. And I think when I work with clients, it is like just starting to get that language of separating the two out and then being like, okay, this other person who I have genuine compatibility with, maybe there's some chemistry there. There's attraction that's, and it is also some psycho ed that attraction isn't just sexual, it's intellectual. You can be attracted to someone's values, how they use their words, like, and really starting to flesh that out and like getting a vocabulary of what are you attracted to. That is a consistent experience and one you can have all the time. The high intensity you can't have all the time, but you can have this consistent one, and starting to kind of pull them apart and differentiate them as much as possible, and really not making the high intensity experience bad or wrong. It was something I'm super passionate about because I know for myself, I had a lot of internalized judgment of like, oh my God, I shouldn't be like doing this thing. This isn't my trauma. And this is like, I know that this isn't going to go anywhere. And it's like, actually, can I just hold? And that there's a part of me that wants this, that wants the high intensity experience, that's what I'm used to. And that's what I know. And like, yeah, this is going to go nowhere. Like me and this person are playing in some high intense peak experience, and like, I actually don't know who this person is on the daily. And they don't know who I am. And that's not what we're bonding over. We're bonding over the fact that together in our dynamic, we can reach this peak experience. That's the bond. And, you know, if committed partnership is what I want, then I need to accept that I can't live in a peak experience. Can't skydive all the time. And I use the example, I like had this like, so my early 20s, like, had like a peak experience kind of dynamic like that. And I was like really struggling to let it go. And I'm terrified of heights, like absolutely petrified. And my psychotherapist was like, what scares you more than letting go of this peak experience? And I was like jumping out of a plane. And I don't think she knew what she was saying in that moment. And she was like, then you need to go jump out of a plane. And I did. I have all these like crazy skydiving stories. Because I was like, but it actually helped me to acknowledge that what I was chasing over here wasn't him. It was a peak experience. And you know, we're all primed to chase peak experiences and get dopamine hits and have that flash all the time. So it makes sense that we'd bring this into our relational life.
I guess the training is learning to fall in love with the kind of subtle calm that someone brings us and the depth that we can experience in that kind of calm, that the depth of the calm and ease and connection.
Because when you have that and that calm and that ease, then the two of you together can go seek a peak experience, and you're co-creating it instead of meeting in one. And that's where like practices like Let It Be Tantra, or you know, maybe your version is like going to Burning Man together, or whatever it is, but it's co-created instead of being the only point of connection. There's a really big difference. So you don't need to never have a peak experience again if you choose someone who has a calm central nervous system. It just means that you're going to co-create that experience together, it requires a different intentionality and level of communication and commitment and all of these things.
I love that. It's really, really simply put. That it's like you said, it's like, yeah, I just love that because it's great. It's really made something super clear to me. It's like we're always going to seek peak experiences, but we can create those peak experiences in our relationship because I think what people often assume is like, oh, I met someone, they're really chill, they're very calm, like, yeah, that's not going to really be the one. But like, if we go in with the mindset of like, well, we can create peak experiences together. Like, and it's funny because I've realized that I kind of always seen myself as someone I have the capacity to create a peak experience in the moment. It could be like, I walk in the kitchen and I do something stupid with my girlfriend and we're laughing and we're joking. It's like, ooh. But, or as you said, we can practice 2 hours of Tantra together and we can have that peak experience, or we can just put some music on and dance and enjoy. But if we assume just because we meet someone and they are very like calm and baseline that, and we don't believe in our capacity to create peak experiences, so that we have to meet someone who can create peak experiences for us, then we will always seek the initial peak experience, I imagine, more often than being in a relationship and believing that we can have that experience within it.
Absolutely. And that's where, I mean, my psychotherapist at the time was not meaning to distill such potent wisdom on me, but like jumping out of a plane and having that peak experience for myself and being like, no, I can co-create this. This doesn't just have to exist in the realm of my dating or in my sexuality. It can exist in lots of places in my life if I prioritize it and if I choose it. Because if it's not a conscious choice, it can become quite chaotic. Just like how choosing it within, a relationship can become quite chaotic. Your personal life and personally choosing it unconsciously will create create a lot of chaos as well. But, you know, developing the type of relationship with yourself when you also know the signs of like, hey, I am starting to feel a little flat or a little dull or a little this, that. It is time for me to go have a more intentional kind of peak or high intensity experience to reinvigorate my life and my relationship with myself or my partnership if we're doing that together as well.
Love that. And it kind of speaks into that experience that a lot of people have is like, oh, I'm in a relationship and it's feeling kind of flat. It's feeling kind of like boring. Like maybe this is a wrong relationship, when actually what's needed is to consciously create some peak experiences or some experiences to have together that reinvigorate ourselves and the connection that we're in. And it's to see ourselves as like having the agency and the power to do that and not being passive in that. Like, oh, the relationship is dull and boring at the moment. Oh, then he or she needs to create something or something needs to happen instead of, and actually go, oh, we can co-create something in this relationship to reignite the fire, have a beautiful peak experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. Beautiful. Oh, and I realized that we have run away with time. Time flies. But thank you for such a beautiful conversation. Like, it's lovely to weave in and out of these different topics and so forth with you. And I think it's been super valuable to me and, you know, also the listeners as well. And I imagine that the listeners are wondering where they can get more of you, can hear more of your beautiful writings and wisdom, and potentially also work with you as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. So on Instagram, it's just my name, Ailey Jolie. My website is also Ailey Jolie. My email is also Ailey@AileyJolie. There's no mystery. I'm pretty easy to find. I work with clients mostly online, but if you are in London, I do work with clients and couples in person. I have an office here, and choosing to be committed to this one place for a while and giving myself that experience after quite some significant traveling and working abroad. I always have like little online offerings that are coming out, and I'm dedicating some time to writing in a book lately. So that will be coming out soon, or some details around it will be coming out soon. But that's easy to find.
Beautiful. I'll be putting all those links in the show notes, so listeners, you can find them down below. And yeah, again, big thank you for your time, your energy, and your wisdom today. And listeners, I'm sure if you've taken something away from today, maybe you've learned something about how you've been operating your dating life or your relationship, you know, I'm sure both of us would love to hear what that is. You know, I love to hear messages from people when they've listened to podcasts and it's made a difference, and I get them from time to time, and it's always such a joy. And I imagine that Ailey feels exactly the same as I do. And yeah, listeners, thank you very much. And ciao. Till next week. I want to say a big thank you for listening. You know, it's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world. You know, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them. You know, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you know, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.